Well, there's big news out of the Middle East. According to U.S. and Israeli officials, Israel and Hamas have reached an agreement to reportedly release 33 hostages in Gaza and establish a ceasefire, which is set to begin on Sunday. But it's being met with mixed reviews. So here to break this all down for us is Jim Hanson. He's the president of WorldStrat and the chief editor for Middle East Forum. So, Jim, it's a hostage deal, but it's not an end to the war. So what should we be taking away from this right now?
I think at some level, Hamas has achieved a tactical victory. They are getting an incredible amount of their own prisoners, murderers, terrorists, and other reprehensible people released for a fairly small number of Israeli hostages. And I think this is due to pressure from the Trump administration. They wanted to have a deal done, as the president so forcefully put it, before January 20th, or all hell was going to break out. And I think this is going to at least satisfy that to start with, but I don't believe it's going to lead to the peace they need and to the kind of hostage deal that the Israelis actually need.
Jim, I know that people both like to share blame and take credit in Washington, D.C., but in this case, who does get the credit, especially given what Biden said earlier today, which we should take a listen to?
Thank you.
Who gets credit for this, Mr. President, you or Trump?
Is that a joke? Oh, thank you.
Is that a joke?
Well, yeah, there's a joke there. It would be that old shuffling lummox leaving the scene. Joe Biden did everything wrong that it was possible for his administration to do, other than cutting off all weapon supplies to Israel. They pressured them continually to go ahead and back off from the needed destruction of Hamas and removal from them as any type of a governing or power base in Gaza. So I think at this point, the credit that the Biden administration gets is forcing Israel into a position where this was the best deal they could do. And the Trump administration incoming and Donald Trump himself gets credit for forcing it to happen in a very immediate time frame, setting a standard for his new administration.
Yeah, and I go back to the point where you made, where Donald Trump said, if the hostages aren't back in time, by the time I get in office, all hell will break out in the Middle East. Well, Joe Biden has had 15 months to deal with this situation. Of course, this is now 5 days away from the inauguration. When I first thought of this, when I first saw, before we were able to dive into anything and read the actual deal, the actual ceasefire that was proposed, I thought, man, doesn't this remind you of Ronald Reagan when he was out there with the Iranian hostage situation? As soon as he got in office, the hostages were released. Now, the details tell a little different story in this, but what do you expect this to really just kick off a Trump administration and peace through strength?
I think it says exactly those words you just mouthed per Ronald Reagan. Enemies and tyrants around the world should be scared of the United States. If they're not, we're doing something wrong. And we've been doing something wrong for the past 4 years. The Biden administration has exuded weakness in every way possible, and tyrants around the world, from Putin to the Iranians to Hamas, Hezbollah, all the other proxies of the Iranian regime, have taken advantage of that. Now, before he's even in office, from Mar-a-Lago, while playing golf, President Trump has been more substantial in forcing, compliance of some sort from our enemies. I think this deal will fall apart in the second phase, and then the hell that President Trump was promising will come to the rest of Hamas. But it also shows that when he puts his foot down, tyrants listen.
Yeah, Jim, let's zero in on that, because that was my next question. Yeah, there's a deal that's coming, and it's coming because of Trump's mere presence and words before he takes office. But what are the chances that this actually is signed, sealed, and delivered before he takes office? And even if that was in some way the case, it seems to me that when he gets into the office, they might decide to fine-tune some details, because as you said in the beginning, this is actually a pretty good way for Hamas to save face.
Yeah, it will fall apart. There's no question. Hamas never deals straight. They have not, in their entire 75-plus year history of trying to push the Jews into the sea, played straight with the state of Israel. So what will happen is there will be some hostages released, thank God. And a lot of bad people will be released for the Palestinians. And then the next phase, after about 14, 15 days of this back and forth, is yet to be negotiated. So that will happen during a Trump administration. Hamas is not going to agree to the conditions required for a final agreement. And I think it's almost certain that Israel will roll back in, finish the military activity, and then start talking about what the days after kind of governance for the Gaza Strip will look like. It will not be Hamas.
Well, Jim, while we have you here, I want to ask you about other news, because we know that Joe Biden has recently released almost a dozen Yemenis from Guantanamo Bay, which includes 2 men who have served as bodyguards for Osama Bin Laden. So what's the reasoning behind that decision?
If you didn't know any better, you could safely say that Joe Biden and his administration, and I don't think Biden's part of it at all, it's the people operating the Biden meat puppet, are doing everything they can to appease the enemies that they considered our allies through this 4 years. They had a completely false view of who our friends were and who our allies were. They're rewarding the bad guys as they leave and basically pouring gasoline on all the fires they've left smoldering during their administration.
Well, let's move to Venezuela, where we have our favorite dictator, Maduro. This guy proposing invading Puerto Rico. He said recently that he has a liberation agenda. Jim, talk to us about this guy, because I'm making a joke, but how serious should we take this threat, and what should Trump do in this case?
I mean, this is our hemisphere. The Monroe Doctrine was important for a reason. We can't have crazy things like commies threatening to invade our territories happening in the Western Hemisphere. So I think whether or not, we end up with Canada, Greenland, Panama as the new north part of America, I don't think we're going to do any major activities in South America, but we're not going to tolerate people like Maduro creating chaos, causing issues with oil supplies and with global shipping and things like that. This is the era where the dangerous tyrants need to rein themselves back in. And I think he's probably just exercising his last few days of free craziness.
The world, they have to get it out while they still can there. Jim Hanson, thanks so much for joining us and for that great breakdown.
Pleasure.
I love it. Commies, they're over here. We can't let this happen. We are so close to a Trump inauguration.
Well, he used the words. We have to have him back on the show. He used the words
Yes.
Monroe Doctrine, the phrase, which is something that we should remember. If there's any part of the world that we should care about, it's probably the one that we live in and the countries closest to us. So I don't want to intervene throughout the world, et cetera, but man, it would be nice if we actually paid attention to our own hemisphere.
Venezuela has oil. We can pay attention to them too. It's okay.